Welcome in, everyone. I see folks are joining us. We'll give it a few minutes to wait for full participants, but welcome, welcome. As folks are sliding into our webinar, I encourage you all to take care of yourselves, your needs. If you need some water, snacks, if you need to use the restroom, anything like that, please feel free to do so at any moment during this webinar, but especially as we're waiting for some other folks to join. Okay. Actually, I think we're almost all here, everyone participating. So we'll go ahead and start now. How's it going, everybody? My name is Maya. I am one of the school programs managers here at the La Brea Tar Pits, and I'm so happy to see you all joining us today, especially for our student webinar series this year. This year, we are talking about plants across time, and today our session is going to be about uncovering ancient plants found here at the La Brea Tar Pits. And of course, as we are together, like I mentioned before, feel free to take care of your needs. So drink some water, use the restroom, have a snack if you've got a fidget or if you have a notepad nearby. Those are wonderful things to have with you while you're with us for about 40-ish, 45 minutes. So yeah. And then just to introduce who we are, I'll let everyone, if they feel like putting their cameras on, but this is our team here today. So you are with myself, Maya, school programs manager. My co-managers here are Ashley, Julie, Diana, and Amanda, and then Cassie is our manager of both sites at NHM and La Brea Tar Pits. So this is our team. Okay. One second here. So today we have students joining us from all of these different schools. As you can see, kind of listing out, you all are coming from across California and beyond. So if you don't see your school mentioned here, uh, we know you're here. Thank you so much for joining us. And then as far as participation goes, so we've got different ways to participate in our webinars today. And since we can't really see any of you and you can only see us right now, we're really going to be using that chat function to ask questions. So during this presentation, if you're watching on Zoom, you can click on the chat box just to type in a question or ask your adult or teacher caregivers to help type in a question for you. That way we'll try to answer these questions at the end of the presentation. And your chat box might look a little different depending on the advice the device that you're using now. So if you're on a tablet, like an iPad, your chat button is going to be in the upper right-hand corner. If you're on a computer or a laptop, like a Chromebook, or if you're watching on your phone, your chat button is going to be on the button in the middle, on the bottom of your screen. So just make sure you know where it's at. Type your question directly into the chat for us to see it, and your question is only going to be seen by the panelists here, which are all museum staff who are running the Zoom right now. Right now it's currently closed, but we will open it up for the presentation. And we ask that all our friends today only put questions into our chat, questions or comments related to our presentation. This helps make sure that we get through as many questions as possible, and it also helps us respect our panelists and our staff as we field these questions for you. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So in just a moment, we are going to hear from our guest speaker, Jessie George. Jessie is a postdoc researcher at the La Brea Tar Pits and Museum. Her research interests work in biogeography, paleobotany, and archaeology. And it's focused on the interactions of plant life, climate, and fauna across time. She's conducted fieldwork and research in sites across Western North America and the Eastern Mediterranean. And her current research includes reconstructing vegetation in central Mexico during the Neogene, which is vegetation, and also vegetation in Los Angeles across the last 55,000 years, exploring possible uses for LA's wealth of paleo data in conservation of urban environments. She's very excited to speak with y'all today. So I am going to turn this over to Jessie, and hope you enjoy.
Hi, everyone. So happy to be here with everyone today. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Just making sure everyone can see that okay. All right. Well, so as Maya said, my name is Jessie, and I work at the La Brea Tar Pits, where we are famous for lots of really big, cool Ice Age megafauna, things like mammoths and mastodons and saber-toothed cats and camels and giant ground sloths. But I work on my favorite thing, which are the plants of the tar pit, so Ice Age plants. So that's what we're going to talk about here today. We're going to talk about plants in time. So just to hit the important stuff of what we'll be discussing during this short presentation. Number one, the Earth is constantly changing. We live on a dynamic planet, and plants are some of our best storytellers when it comes to our changing planet and the climate of our planet. And fossil plants here at La Brea tell us about 60,000 years of change on our planet. So we have great stories coming from our plants here at the tar pits. So just to address some important words before we get started, words that many of you will be familiar with, some of you may not. Earth, so we're all together, the large round rock we call home. Plants, these are small to very, very tall organisms that are rooted in place. They make their own food from sunlight. They provide us and many more living things with oxygen and food. They are incredibly important to life on this planet and take many different shapes and forms. We talk about climate a lot. What is climate? So when you go outside and it is a sunny day or a rainy day, what you're experiencing at the moment is weather. When we talk about climate, we're talking about sort of weather in a bigger picture, what weather is like over a long period of time. So when you think about where you live, would you describe where you live as a hot place, a cold place, a wet place, a dry place? We think about climate in months and years rather than days and hours. So it's just some examples. If we're thinking about the Sonora Desert, the Sonora Desert has 2 rainy seasons, but we don't think of the Sonora Desert as a rainy place. We think of it as a dry place because it's relatively dry compared to other parts of the planet. In the Pacific Northwest, up by Oregon and Washington State, this is a cooler, wetter climate. If we go further south into the tropics, we have very wet climate that's also very hot. And if we go way, way north or way, way south to the poles, what we get is a very cold and often dry climate in the tundra. So this is how we talk about climate, how we generally describe what the weather is like in a place over long periods of time. We're going to talk about fossils. So what are fossils? Fossil is any trace or clue of ancient or very old life. So a paleontologist or a paleobotanist, what I do, I look at old plants, are kind of like detectives. They're looking for any clues to tell them what lived here a long time ago. So if you go outside of your house, and find a leaf on the ground, you can be fairly certain that the tree that that leaf belonged to lives somewhere around you. And that's sort of what we do, but looking for really, really old leaves and for trees that lived here a really, really long time ago. Um, and that's something that's important to do because our planet, the Earth, is constantly changing. Over the 4.6 billion years of history of our planet, the Earth itself has changed, the life on it has changed, the climate of the planet has changed. And we look to the fossil record to teach us about how those changes happened, what they look like. And when we think of fossils, we think of those really big, impressive, famous animals like Tyrannosaurus rex or woolly mammoth or saber-toothed cats. But some of our most informative fossils are some of our smallest. They're fossils that belonged to ancient plants. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And just to give you an idea of some of the changes that have occurred on our planet, this is a video showing you ice sheets from relatively recent history. This is from about 21,000 years ago to about 5,700 years ago. So in Earth time, this is pretty recent, but you can see the ice sheets. We live in California, just to the south of the continent here, but these ice sheets ranged in, 1 to 2 miles in depth. So they could be like 100 to 300 school buses, long ways deep of ice above your head. So these are huge, massive ice sheets that covered a good part of our continent during the Ice Age. And this is really recent. The Earth is constantly changing. So, if we look to the Arctic, the North Pole, right now, right, we see tundra. 40 million years ago, there were swamps in that very same place. Today in Central Oregon, we have semi-desert, but 40 million years ago, it was a semi-tropical forest. So we see a lot of change on the planet, and we really want to understand what those changes were and how they happened. So to do that, plants are some of our best climate storytellers, and there's a reason for that. If we look to the fossil record, large animals have the ability to move. If the climate is changing, if a habitat they're living in becomes not suitable for them anymore, they can move to a different place. But plants cannot. They're rooted to the ground. If you have a single tree and the climate where that tree is growing suddenly isn't good for it anymore, it's not getting enough rain, it's getting too much sunshine, it's too hot, it can't pick up its roots and walk away, that tree has to survive there. It has to be okay there. And it has ways of moving over longer periods of time through its generations. It can spread its seeds for their differences through cones, through seeds that fly in the air, through seeds that float on water. Some seeds hitchhike on animals like us. If you've ever gotten burrs stuck in your socks, that's a plant trying to get its generation to grow further from where it's growing. Some seeds explode. They throw their seeds good distances from where they currently are. Some seeds just look like tasty snacks to animals like us. So we eat them and we help spread them. So plants have ways of moving across generations, but a single tree can't survive if the climate isn't suitable for it. So if it's not adapted to that climate, it's not going to survive. And when we talk about adaptation, we're talking about a particular change in the body or structure of a living thing that helps the animal or plant survive under new conditions. So this is something that happens over a very long time. For a plant, that might be the height of the plant, how tall it is, the leaf shape, the fruit and seed type, the wood structure, how long it lives, all of these little things can feed together to help it survive better in a very specific place. And because plants have all of these adaptations to help them survive in very specific places, they make great storytellers. So I have a chart here, and it might be a little confusing at first, but let's walk through it. What we have here, these two lines going up and down and side to side. The up and down line, this axis, is showing you the amount of rain in an area. So if you're down at the bottom of this line, we're in a very dry place. And if you're at the very top, you're in a very wet, rainy place. On this line that goes left to right, side to side, if you're on the left side, you're in a very hot place. The temperature is very hot. And if you're on the right side, you're in a very cold place. The temperature is very cold. So we have all these biomes, these places where plants live that can be defined by how much rain they get and how hot the temperature is. So if you're down here in the corner in a very dry and hot place, you're going to be in a desert. You're going to see plants that are adapted to a desert. If you're in a very rainy and a very hot place, like we saw before, you're going to be in a tropical rainforest. You're going to see plants that are adapted to tropical rainforest. If you're in a very hot or a very cold and a very dry place, you might be in a tundra, you might be in a grassland or a boreal forest, a forest that we see up in the northern latitudes that has a lot of pine trees and evergreen trees and plants like that. And because we see plants very nicely organized around the planet based off of how much rain, what the temperature is, we can actually use relatives of plants that are alive today to see what the climate was in the past. Are we seeing a lot of grasses in the fossil record? Well, that tells us that we are getting a particular range of temperatures and a particular range of precipitation. Are we seeing a lot of tropical plants, big leaves, really tropical relatives? Well, we're probably in a very rainy place back in the past. So that's why plants are such good storytellers, because they're specifically adapted to where they grow. But how do we look at them in the past? How do we know? Well, there are a lot of ways to look at traces of plants in the past. We're going to look at just a couple today: fossil wood, plant microfossils, and plant macrofossils. So fossil wood, if any of you have seen a tree that's been cut down, you might have seen those rings that emanate from the center of the tree. These are really informative rings. Wood and trees are really excellent historians for the spots where they're growing. So those rings that you're seeing are from growth that that tree puts on every year on the outside. Those are bundles of vessels or cells that help transport water and nutrients up the trunk of the tree to its branches and leaves. And every year, the tree puts on a new ring of growth on the outside. So if you're looking at the center of this cut tree, you're looking at the very start of its life, its first years. And as you move out, ring by ring, you're seeing it grow bigger and bigger and bigger every year. And we can see those rings because in temperate areas where we have seasons like spring and summer and fall and winter show very strongly, we have something called early wood or spring growth, where suddenly, if you've ever seen plants bud out and new fresh leaves everywhere in the spring, you have all this growth occurring. You have really fast growth happening on trees. So you have these really big vessels and cells forming where it's growing a lot really quickly. And as the year goes on and things get hot and water is less available, those cell and that growth slows. They get smaller and smaller and smaller until you hit that line where that tree is going dormant until the next spring growth. And that pattern represents a year of that tree's life. And if you look at this cut tree here, you'll see rings that are really, really wide, where they would have had a lot of water and a lot of growth. You'll see rings where they're so thin you can barely see them at all. And that's where maybe it didn't have a lot of water. Maybe that was a year of strong drought. That tree didn't grow at all. It was struggling. So through these rings, we actually have this record of the tree's life. It's telling us what every year was like for this particular individual. So they're amazing historians in that way. We also have plant microfossils. So these are fossils that we can't see without a microscope to help us. They're very, very small. Some of them you might be familiar with. If you've ever seen a bee travel from flower to flower with those sacs of pollen on its legs as it helps germinate those flowers as it collects its nectar and honey, or if you have seasonal allergies and get really sneezy when plants are producing a lot of pollen. Pollen is this really fine powder you can see in this video coming from this cypress tree here. And this powder helps with reproduction. So trees and plants and flowers spread this powder to help produce those seeds and fruits on the next generation. So this particular plant here is cypress. So that pollen, those tiny, tiny little grains of that powder that it's producing are going to look like this pollen grain right here. Different plants produce different pollen types. They all look different. They have different shapes and forms. Some have spikes, some have lots of holes. So they're really recognizable. You can figure out what tree or what flower produced that pollen by looking at the shape of the pollen and the size of that pollen. And it's a really tough material, these pollen grains. It survives really well. So it's a great source for paleobotanists to use to look into the past and see what was growing in different areas. We also have phytoliths. These are probably a little less familiar. So phytolith, phyto means plant and lithos means stone. So if you put it together, it means plant stones. These are tiny, tiny little plant stones. Not everything produces them, but grasses do really well. So if you look at a grass like this Nacella pulchra I have here, if you were to zoom in on a microscopic level to the tissue of this plant, you would see its cellular structure like you're seeing here. And grasses often do this really cool thing where they take up minerals from the soil, and those minerals are incorporated into its cellular structure and harden. So grasses kind of have this secret mineral armor that you can't see and wouldn't know about. You kind of think of it like Wolverine's adamantium. And when that plant dies and decomposes, all those cells that have hardened with minerals break up into the soil and look something like this. There we are. You have these little tiny plant stones, the shape of those plant cells. They're kind of like glass-like little cell stones of the plants that you can look at under a microscope, identify, and see if there were grassland in an area, if it was forested, what type of grasses lived there. They're really cool, tiny plant fossils that tell us a lot about what plant life was like in a spot thousands or millions of years ago. And then you have my favorite plant macrofossils. So these are fossils you don't need a microscope for. You can see just with your eyes. So these are often seeds and cones and leaves, and they can preserve in lots of different ways. They can just dry out, and if they stay in a dry area, it's called desiccated, they'll never break down. They just stay there. They can char if they get burnt. They can preserve their shape in the form of that, sort of like charcoal or coal. You can get an impression of a plant, like if you ever pressed your hand or foot into clay, you can get that of a leaf. Plants can be compressed or flattened and permineralized. It means they turn to stone. So they preserve in lots of different ways. Here at the tar pits, our macrofossils are soaked in tar or asphalt, and that's what preserves them. So we have the original material, it's the original cone, it's the original leaf, it's the original seed. You can imagine it's just like a sponge that's soaked in asphalt. And because that asphalt is all throughout that sponge, it's protected it from breaking down. And that's exactly what's happened with these fossils. So I'm going to test your plant macrofossil knowledge. Let's see how closely you've been paying attention to the seeds in your everyday life. I have some pictures of some everyday seeds, and I want to see if anybody can recognize them. So you can put them in the chat, you can whisper it to yourself and nobody else, you can say it out loud to yourself. Just want to see if you can recognize what these very common seeds are. So this is the first one. This is something you might have in oil form or as a paste. You might see it on your favorite bread products. This is sesame seed. Next one of my favorite. Anybody think they know? This is black bean. This one I know many of you have encountered. This is in one of the most common fruits that we eat. These are apple seeds. This one you might see in all blended up in a sauce called hummus. You might know it as garbanzo bean. You might know it as chickpea. It's a very, very favorite summer snack. This one is watermelon seeds. This is my favorite. I'm gonna give this one some time for you to put your best guesses. Anyone know what this one is? I think it's so pretty. This is a poppy seed. This is what poppy seeds look like. If you've ever had one on your bagel or other bread products or fed some to birds, this is poppy seed. It's so pretty. Great job, everybody. Good seed test. So now we all know what macrofossils are. We've all done our work getting better at macrofossil identification. Let's look at the plant fossils from La Brea and what we've learned from them. So you saw this picture before. These are some plant fossils that we've identified and radiocarbon dated. So we found out the ages for 188 individual plant fossils, like what you see in front of you. We found at least 26 different types of plants in that process. And one plant of those doesn't live in California today. So we found Rocky Mountain juniper, which doesn't grow in California today. So that was really exciting for us to find a plant that no longer grows here. And we put all of those plants together and those dates together, and we formed a timeline, a history of plant life in Los Angeles. So you can see here, if we go way, way back in time in La Brea's record to about 50,000 years ago, what Los Angeles was like at that time was like a coastal pine forest, so very wet, probably a lot of fog, much more rain than we get today, and lots of shade and these beautiful cypresses and pines towering above you. If you move forward in time, when the ice sheet further north to us that we saw in that video was getting bigger and bigger and taller and spreading further and further south, Los Angeles seem to be getting a bit drier. So we lose these big, beautiful pines and cypresses, those coastal forests. And what we get looks a bit like this picture you see below. We get this juniper and oak woodland. So much more spread out, lots of room for megafauna to roam around and graze and browse from all these plants. And then we see a lot of change happening at once. The climate, you can see with this line here, as it goes low, it's getting colder. And as it goes up and up and up, we're getting warmer and warmer and warmer. We see this huge change in climate where we get really, really warm. And we see lots of fast turnover for the plants that we're seeing living in Los Angeles, living at La Brea. And we get plants like we're seeing here, coastal sagebrush and grassland, plants that are better with warmer environments and better with more frequent fire incidents, so fires burning. So we see a lot of change in our vegetation to suit a place that is much warmer and sees a lot more fire. And this is important because this is about the time that we stop seeing all of those really cool ice age mammals. So those giant ground sloths and dire wolves and camels and horses and saber-toothed cats and mastodons, they all disappear. Their habitats are no longer suitable for them at that time. And we get into a world that we're much more familiar with. And these climates keep changing, and we need good storytellers to understand how things changed in the past so that we can better understand what those changes are going to be in the future. So this is really what we've learned from the plants of La Brea. Um, they have been excellent storytellers to us, and they've taught us a lot about LA's past and hopefully a bit about what its future will be. So thank you guys for joining me. This is the end of my presentation. I know we'll have questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Jesse. Yeah, I think we've got some time for questions. So if you don't mind, I can read a few off for you. Um, just a note for everybody participating, thank you all so much for contributing those questions. We may not have time for all of them, but I encourage you to come visit us or check us out on our website, look up stuff as well if we don't get to your question today. Yeah, let's go ahead and start with some of these questions. And I think one that is really relative to where we're located right now is from David. David is asking, what are fossils?
That's a great question, David. Yeah, so fossils are really any trace of ancient life that we find. So you can put a date on it. You know, some people call fossils something that is older than 10,000 years. But really it's anything that gives us a clue that something was alive here. So it can be, you know, a burrow of something that used to exist, that something made. It could be a footprint. It can be all sorts of things, but it's really just that clue, that trace that there was something living there.
Nice. Thank you. Let's see. We've got another question just about the tar pits from Cardison, asking, what is the oldest plant that you have found?
Great question. So here at the tar pits, we have a pretty set timeline, and that part of that has to go with our ability of how we date things. So our asphalt seeps started entrapping life. It seems to be around 60,000 years ago. So most of our fossils are about that old. We think some are probably a little bit older, but it's hard to get an exact date on that. We have fossils from nearby that are as old as 120,000 years ago. So anytime you dig down and have the possibility of coming across a pretty cool fossil, but most of our old ones here are about 60,000 at the oldest range.
Cool. From Rosalba asking, how long did you go to school to get your job?
How long did I go to school? Oh boy. Well, if you really like school and like what you do, as you go forward in school and do more and more, it stops being so much like school. You start just doing the things that you really want to and interest you. So I went to school probably, whoa, like math nine, after I left high school, 9 more years. Uh, but at some point, my school was just working on fossils like this. So if you're doing what you love, you know, it's great. It's great to be in school.
On that note, Cynthia's asking, what do you enjoy the most about your job? And do you work long hours?
Um, we do work a lot because we care a lot about what we do. I think, we're doing stuff that we think is really important and answering questions we think are really important. So that tends to be like, well, just a little bit more, just a little bit longer. Um, but what is my favorite part? I love working with material from La Brea. I love looking into the past and asking questions and finding ways, creative ways of answering those questions. I love working in a museum context where I get to be surrounded by people who do different things than me and I get to learn from them. Um, I think that is one of the best parts of my job is just being surrounded by really passionate people who do lots of different things from what I do because I love what I do. And we all get to share it and learn from one another. And that's really cool and nice. That's maybe my favorite part.
Nice. From Mr. Brewer's fourth/fifth grade class, they're asking, do you find pollen in the tar?
That's a really good question. We do. We have not The plants have not been given enough attention. I'll say it. In the history of the tar pits. So we're just starting to look at some of these really cool other types of plant fossils. So, we have now recently done a lot of work on those bigger fossils, those macrofossils, but we're just starting to do some really cool research. And the curator, one of two curators now is a paleobotanist, and her specialty is those smaller microfossils like phytoliths and pollen. So we're just starting some really exciting research using those fossils now. But the answer is yes, we do find them. And stay tuned because we'll have a lot of cool new stories to tell based off of them soon.
So exciting. Um, Jay is asking, what's the oldest adaptive plant that has survived in LA?
That is an interesting question. I the oldest surviving adaptive plant. So we have plants that have some plants that have been here the whole record, right? So we see them at that 60,000 to like 45,000 period where we have those beautiful coastal forests. And we see them around today. So I guess some of our plants that are the longest running and have really survived well in Los Angeles, I would say are oaks. Our oaks are really these amazing sentinels that have just been here and provided for living things in Los Angeles for the whole history. So I would say our oaks are our longest running, longest surviving
Neat.
plants. Yeah.
Neat. Okay. Kind of going in more about some of these plants that might be around today. Do you know, Vita is wondering if tree rings have ever been recorded, especially while they're forming, and if you know of anything that has to do with that.
Yeah. We do get tree rings. We have a lot of trees. We have at least one. There's at least one. Our biggest fossil. Our biggest fossil is a whole juniper tree, an entire tree that was excavated, still rooted into its original embankment. So it just slowly was buried over time. Um, and that has rings. We have a lot, and that picture I showed you, right? That was a tar pit fossil that you were seeing with all those rings. So we have ancient fossil rings. Anytime a tree in the park has to be removed. Maybe it died naturally. Maybe there's another reason. We make sure to take a cut of it so we have that record. We want its story. We want to know what it had to tell. Um, so in a place like Los Angeles, we joke that we don't get a lot of seasons in LA, but we do. And that's enough for trees to form rings and to have that yearly story. So yeah, every tree you see is forming rings every year. Um, and that's a great source of information. Look to the plants to tell you what climate is like and how it's changed, whether they're fossil or whether they're alive today. But yeah, tree rings are something, again, we're actively looking to and working on here at the Tar Pits because we have this amazing record, books of trees.
Fantastic. Always look to the plan.
Yeah,
Okay,
look to the
I think we
plants.
have time for a few more. Um, let's see. I see VCS staff is asking, why do plants need seeds?
Sorry, you froze right at the
Oh,
very end of that
oh no.
question for me.
Why do plants need seeds?
Why do plants need seeds? That's a great question. Plants need seeds in the same way or produce seeds in the same way that we have children and families, right? Plants want to survive. All organisms want to survive in the long run. And to do that, you need the next generation to grow up and be healthy and thrive. So a plant and a tree and a flower um, will produce seeds. Some plants produce spores and kind of do it slightly different way, but it's all that need to pass on your genetic information to the next generation and to survive and to adapt and to move forward into the future. So just like we do.
And let's go with one more question here. Um, what's the first fossil plant that you researched?
The first fossil plant, I was a volunteer at the tar pits, and we came across a seed that nobody had seen before. And it ended up being a tiny little, it was a beautiful seed. It was tiny, tiny, tiny. And if you looked at it under a microscope, it had this beautiful, ornate seed coat with lots of different like bumps and ornamentation to it. Like it was very pretty. And it ended up being this little water plant, a plant that lives in water. That I'm absolutely blanking on the common name of. The scientific name is Monte Fontana. It's a very cute little. It's related to uh oh gosh, watercress? No, it's related to another very common little wet plant. But that was the first one. I took a picture of it to the herbarium in Santa Barbara, and we found the answer together with the guy who works in the herbarium there. It was very exciting.
Nice. That's great. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us about your research and your passion and the work that you do here at the La Brea Tar Pits. And again, everyone, if we didn't get to your questions, we definitely encourage you to kind of check out more, dive into this research. It's really interesting and it's really exciting to kind of, um, learn more about a very localized area right here in Los Angeles. Yeah. All right. So this is the end of our webinar. Thank you all so much for joining. In a couple weeks, we will continue this webinar series to continue talking about plants across time here at the La Brea Tar Pits. Our next session, we'll be talking more about our present plants, the plants that we find here in LA today and in Southern California, and what we might possibly, or how we might possibly connect with them both today and in the future. Yeah, thank you all so much.
Everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.